In 2015, a little indie title called Undertale was released and quickly blew up on the internet. Given that it was developed by virtually one person, it definitely stood out in the vast sea of quirky indie titles, but it was far from the next coming of the Omnisire. Just as a reference, in that same year, games like Witcher 3, Bloodborne, and Rise of the Tomb Raider were released, and if you compare those to Undertale, its success and fanbase are dwarfed by those 3 titles alone. Undertale is so small compared to those other titles, and so it's no surprise that even though it was nominated for 3 different categories in the Game Awards, it didn't win a single one. Not Best Role-Playing Game of the Year, that one went to Witcher 3, not Best Games for Impact, that one went to Life is Strange, and not Best Independent Game. You know, the one prize that you would have expected Undertale to win. It didn't even receive a nomination for Game of the Year. And before you say anything, Mario Maker and Fallout 4 were nominated for Game of the Year. One arguably not even a game and more of a tool, and the other one completely and utterly broken. I bring this all up because while Undertale might be successful and there might be a loud fan base around it, it's relatively small compared to other titles. So when I started my journey searching for Undertale Fangames, I thought I would find a few games here and there, and that would be it. But the more time I spent looking for projects, the more I found. It reached a point where I had to stop searching for projects because there are simply too many of them. I will try to cover the more interesting projects throughout this journey, and if there is one you are missing from this list, just feel free to comment down below. Also, don't forget to like. In the world of Undertale, humans and monsters exist. Thousands of years ago, they had a war where the humans won and trapped all the monsters underground. There is no escape from that place, but if you turn out to be a stupid child, you can still fall down there. So, after crash landing, you soon meet a flower that wants to unalive you, a goat mom that wants to keep you safe, and a skeleton that might or might not want to punch your lights out depending on how you behave.
Let's go, dirty brother killer.
You befriend or dust a bunch of monsters, fight the king of the underground Asgore, a flower kills the king, and you kill the flower with the help of the dead children's souls that were killed in the past by Asgore. Well, congratulations, you just finished your neutral run. There are technically 3 more runs to go. You can either dust literally everyone and reset the world, befriend everyone, go on a date, and then free all the monsters, or dust everyone, reset the world, befriend everyone, and find out that your save file is corrupted forever, and once you do your bad ending run, there is no way back and it will always be a mass disaster. There you go, that's Undertale. And while there are many things that you can praise Undertale for, I think the one thing that stood out in Undertale was its battle system. It is a mix of turn-based battle and bullet hell, which turns the boring and slow and brain-dead turn-based fighting systems, like in Pokemon, into a more bearable and skill-based fighting system, where you also have the choice to just not fight. And I think the reason why people connected with Undertale was because the gameplay, the story, and even the art style worked hand in hand to create a cohesive world. You could say Undertale has ludonarrative harmony. I know, my brain is gigantic, but don't need to praise me. With the bar set so high, one would imagine that making a fan game based on Undertale is pretty difficult, especially when you want to write a prequel. And it is. From what I could find, there are a few Undertale projects that try to expand the story of the other children's souls, those being Undertale Yellow, Orange, Green, Kindred Spirits, and Peace, Tale of Patience. There are with certainty more, and there are probably some being developed right now as we speak, but those are the ones I could find and I find the most interesting. Undertale Yellow is one of the most well-known fan games in the Undertale fandom. It follows the Soul of Justice and immediately changes things up after the short intro. Instead of going with tutorial on the puzzle gauntlet, you fall through the floor to a section under the ruins. There you follow a mysterious figure until you finally confront them. On your journey there, you meet new and old characters, fight new enemies, and of course solve different puzzles. What has been shown so far is of very high quality, and if the developers continue with more original locations until Asgore instead of going through Snowden, the core, and the factory again, I think this might be one of the best Undertale fan games out there. Undertale Orange follows the story of the Soul of Bravery. While competent, it seems more like a knockoff. It tries to follow the story beats of the original game too much, while also having several boring additions to the game. For example, in an early section of the game, you enter a maze that is not lit up, so you have to tumble through this darkness while encountering a bunch of enemies. It takes forever, there are no hints, and the constant encounters are really annoying. Later on, there's a specific enemy that has shields, and one of their attacks is shields that just jump from left to right very, very slowly. And at the end of the demo, you meet Toriel, and she's just there. I think she's supposed to be a surprise that they were holding off on, but it wasn't. I knew Toriel was going to be there, since it is established that she knew all the other children in the main game. While not necessarily a low quality game, Undertale Orange is just Undertale with a different skin and worse gameplay. Undertale Green, on the other hand, really switches things up. It follows the soul of kindness and puts you in a completely different region right from the start. You have to solve puzzles like in the original game, you can dust or spare monsters like in the original game, you can play minigames unlike the original game, and it seems that in every major section of the game, you have a companion, those being Undyne and Ghost so far. I like this one because instead of trying to replicate the original story, it immediately steers off in its own direction and starts to remix things, which is also something that can be said about Undertale Kindred Spirits, also known as Blue and Purple, deals with the soul of integrity and perseverance. I played an old demo of the game, but what was shown so far was very puzzle heavy and I didn't really like the puzzles. It's an older demo, so maybe the newer version will look completely different, who knows, but this one looks more like it will be cancelled at some point. Funny enough, Undertale Peace, the Tale of Patience, also deals with the blue soul and is just an idea so far. This is going to be one of the few examples I bring up that have almost an inactive Game Jolt page that hasn't received an update in a few months or years. The majority of projects you will find look like this. You have some concept art, maybe some mock screenshots, a description that tells you roughly what the story is about, and a devlog from a few months or years ago. There's nothing wrong with giving up on projects, by the way, and what most likely happens is that they start with a great idea because they like the original game, and the moment they start developing, they notice that it's more work than they signed up for, and so the game is silently left to rot.
Am I right, lads, or am I right, lads?
You are right, lad.
Cheers, lad.
In the Undertale fandom, there's a concept of alternative universes because the original game opens up the door for different timelines with its meta story. Just scrolling through the wiki, you will find a lot of so-called AUs. Some of them are really entertaining, expand the original story in a completely new direction, and some of them are just Real 34. Anyways, in the vast sea of AUs, the most well-known ones are Underfell, where everyone is super mean to each other, and Underswap, where almost every character is swapped around. And of course, there exist fan games of both of those AUs. Underfell is the perfect example of what the Undertale fangame landscape looks like. We have 2 demos, 2 idea pages, and 3 cancelled projects. Usually an AU doesn't have this many projects, but it's Underfell, so it's to be expected. Anyways, Underfell by VLG Games has a demo that ends with the tutorial section and is cancelled. Underfell by Primus also has a demo, but the project has been abandoned a long time ago. Underfell by UF Fangame has been cancelled even though it had one of the highest follow accounts on GameJolt. The only Underfell game I could find that is still being worked on is Underfell by Team Colossus, but besides concept art and 2 spoof screenshots, there's not much to see here. Hopefully this one will see the light of day, but you never know with these projects. Since I mentioned Underswap already, let's move on to that. TS Underswap, not to be confused with Underswap, which you can't find on GameJolt anymore, is based on the cancelled AU called Underswap by Popcorn Prince. TS Underswap was one of the first AU stories I played that didn't feel like it was doing the same exact thing as the original story. You still have the puzzle sections at the beginning, but the types of puzzles are completely different from the main game. There are some added mechanics that I think are from Deltarune, like dodging environmental damage. All the areas look completely different yet familiar, and I think they are more vibrant. We have a quest log, a monster catalog, and the UI looks so much better compared to the original game. One of the main reasons why I kept playing Undertale Fangames was because I really enjoyed this one, and if all the other fangames were similar to this one, I knew I would have a good time. And I wasn't wrong, necessarily. There's nothing wrong about Undertale the game, but also there isn't anything special. If you played any other fangame, you probably played this one as well. After playing the game though, I actually went out to read the Undertale comic, and it's probably one of my favorite AUs so far. It reimagines the Undertale world with monsters actually being monsters that eat humans. In this world, Undyne is the queen, and after a very long time, the machine that keeps magic and therefore the monsters alive is slowly breaking down, and they're also running out of food. At first they don't want to eat humans, but after Sans tricks Papyrus to make food with human flesh, they all start getting the taste of it, and so hijinks ensue. It's one of the darker AUs I've seen around, and while the original game is dark on its own way, most of the other AUs try to be more bright, some of them literally. PS Undertale, not to be confused with Sea Undertale, is Undertale with a space theme. I don't necessarily know what I think about this one because there isn't much to judge here. I can already see that this game is very nicely done, but unlike games like TS Underswap or any other Undertale colors, I can't really see where it's going. My fear is that we'll end like Undertale Orange, where the product is of okayish quality, but because it follows the same story beats as the original game, it's going to be boring story-wise. Unlike our next game. In the world of Dustale, Sans, after being dusted over and over and over again, has decided that it was enough, and so they go out and start killing other monsters to level up and beat Chara. It is one of the rare finished Undertale games, but I simply could not go beyond the initial Sans fight, and there are two major reasons for that. One, there is one attack that will damage you no matter what. Two, the fight doesn't immediately restart once you approach Sans again. Those two things make the fight slow, boring and annoying. I don't care that it's difficult, I'm fine with the difficulty, but having to listen to Sans being an edgy boy again and again and again and again just drove me nuts. From what I played, it is a really well made game, and the fact that a game was finished is already a great accomplishment, which is not something that can be said for our next game called
That's a wonderful idea!
Atonement puts the character in hell after they had too many bad endings. How the main character died is not really well explained, but I assume either Sans or Floy killed them somehow. So you land in hell and Satan greets you. They tell you that you can't escape and you're also not able to kill anyone down here, so don't even try. As soon as you finish talking to Satan and start up your journey, Chara takes over your character and talks to you, the player, directly, and since my computer's name is Carl Lucas, I was actually addressed as Carl Lucas. If the game had called me Lucas, then I would have been more impressed, but it was a nice touch. This game doesn't do much different than the main game, except that you're forced to attack the enemies first to calm them down, and only then can you show them mercy. But right now there are only two major enemies, a Druggy and an Ego. If you're aware of the 7 deadly sins, it's pretty easy to map the Druggy to the sin of sloth and the Ego to lust. The Ego could be a pride, since when you show her mercy she decides to show her true self, and not what you became after what I assume are many plastic surgeries. What really underlines the whole 7 deadly sins motif and the hell thing, it's the unfinished enemy at the end of the demo, who is a fat man, and being fat is often connected with the sin of gluttony. Unfortunately, this project was cancelled, but the developer created another game I actually really enjoyed called Delta Traveler takes the mechanics and the characters from Deltarune and transports them into the original Undertale world, and no, I will not play Deltarune until it's finished. Anyways, there are several different things that I like about this. For example, having party members with different abilities, powering up your energy by being close to the attacks, a sort of risk of reward thing, and that the newer art style of the characters still fit the old Undertale world. As of making of this video, Section 1 is available, but Section 2 is at least partially done, and since this project has received a lot of attention, I assume it will be at least around for a while, and maybe we will even get a finished fan game for once. Having a finished game doesn't mean that it's going to be enjoyable though. As a disclaimer for this next game, I may sound very mean, and to be honest, I am not a nice person. I'm annoying when I'm right, I'm annoying when I'm wrong. I'm generally an annoying person as a whole, and I criticize everything, even things that I enjoy. Still, I like to give everyone a fair chance, and so I played through all of Here's the problem, it's just the original game, but worse. There's very little enemy variety, the whole dating with Papyrus meme is completely gone, you never go to Undyne's house, the fight against Metaton has only one attack pattern, and holy shit, the factory section of the game has one enemy over and over and over and over again. Look, I understand that it was mainly made by one person, and there's probably a lot of effort put into this game. Still, that doesn't excuse the game for being so nicht boring. Several times throughout the game, I was so close to quitting, and I thought maybe there's something different at the end, but there was nothing. And the story is set after the good ending of Undertale, where you play a new character. You explore the surface a bit, and then you play with Frisk and Monster Kid. Monsters don't really attack, but you still encounter them, and then you fall in the underground again, where a talking cat, who is traumatized that his human friend was shanked by other criminal humans, tries to erase you. Also, this cat wants to eradicate the human race because of their trauma. Well, it turns out that in the underground, there's actually an anti-human faction forming, and they want to annihilate all humans, which is understandable. We did trap them in the cave after all. Oh, bitch! Didn't you learn the first time not fuck with humans? Ever heard of the Neanderthals? Huh. Well, if you haven't, that's because we killed them! You don't fuck with humans, bitch! At the end of the demo, it turns out that Papyrus and Sans stayed in the underground. And I know, Sans and Papyrus are pretty cool, but why bring them back if you already have your own Sans' Papyrus stand-ins with the guard dogs, which fit the whole anti-human thing way more because it's a subversion on man's best friend, you know? The whole game is fine. There are a lot of new ideas here, especially with the anti-human faction, but because the game tries to lean too heavily on the source material, it seems more like it's not taking flight. Undertale Otherworld, on the other hand, doesn't rely too much on the source material. It tries its best to distance itself from Undertale, and yet I haven't much to say about the game. As soon as I stopped playing the game, I forgot most of it. I couldn't even remember that there was a cat monster as one of the major enemies in the game. My assumption is that the demo is too short, nothing stood out to me, and at that point I had played so many projects that everything became kind of a blur, so if your game was just okay, my brain just flushed out the memories. A shame, because looking back at the footage, it seems to be fine. It's funny because it doesn't take much to impress me, to be quite honest. Undertale is a very short party game, which basically encapsulated the innovative part of Undertale but added its own flair. Of course, there's a pacifist and bad time route, and while the sprites might look crude, I think that's what sets it apart from other games. Anyway, the game starts immediately with the encounter of Icarus the Boy, which is a stand-in for Flowey. You have to attack Icarus, otherwise it will not be able to move on, and after you dust Icarus, the game goes psych! It was all a game all along. You can keep playing the game, and when your mom comes around, you can hide the screen, but to move on, you have to get caught. The fight against mom is very long, and you have to make her super angry first, and then start learning, which calms her down like a real mom. I like this. It takes the mechanics from Undertale to tell a completely different story and even expands on the original ideas. Later on, you take a test, and it's basically a quiz show with the Undertale mechanics. Even though it's a short party game, I would take this over Undertale Orange or Memory any day of the week. In similar vein to Undertale, Undertale is an even shorter party game where everyone is an idiot, and I might be wrong here, but I think this game is trying two things. It's pointing out the ridiculousness of the main game with the fact that you get dusted at your first puzzle, Chara immediately popping up in the game, and Sans going bad time mode the moment you meet him. And I also think that the game is criticizing how fan games are generally done. I often found myself playing the beginning of Undertale over and over and over again without any changes. One would expect that if you want to make a fan game, you would try to distance yourself enough to not be counted as a knockoff, and while Undertale Yellow, for example, manages to do that perfectly, games like Memory just fail in every step along the way. I know I'm harping on Memory a lot here, but at least I was able to finish it. There are games throughout my journey where I was so fundamentally bored that I didn't even try to finish them. Poketale is Pokemon, but with Undertale characters. There are a few Poketale projects, but the one I played mixed catchable monsters that used Undertale sprites and Pokemon sprites, which is not that great. Just use monster sprites from Undertale, there are enough of them in the game. Still, that would have been fine, but the first and only gym leader is not beatable if you don't grind up to level 10, and with the typical turn-based fighting system as in the original Pokemon, this is boring as balls. Undertale is known to have changed up the turn-based fighting system with the bullet hell section so you wouldn't get bored, and this game comes along and goes right back to the slow, boring, and most brain-dead fighting system to ever exist. This type of fighting system was made at a point in time where technology wasn't ready for something else. It's time that we move on from all of this. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but holy Please stop making boring, turn-based fighting systems where the main game consists of smashing OK in a menu. And while we're talking about boring fighting systems, the same thing happened with Fragile Hearts, which I suppose is a reference to how monster souls are more fragile than human souls, but who cares? It was boring. I couldn't even tell you what I played because I don't remember. The sprites are a bit questionable as well sometimes, but Undertale was no Picasso, so that wasn't the thing that made me quit the game. The game was just that boring. And if you think it can get worse, no, it gets much worse. The Great Noodle Jape, Luna Tale, and Last Tale are all visual novels, and if there's something even more boring than turn-based fighting systems, it might be visual novels. You could say the art looks great in Luna and Last Tale, but again, who cares? The main problem with visual novels is that they don't make use of games as a medium. They are basically interactive books, and to this day I have not played a visual novel that didn't bore me to my bones. If you like visual novels, what is wrong with you? And also, you really want to play an Undertale visual novel? And lastly, Slender Tale. If you think I was harsh on Poketale and the visual novels, well, then you clearly don't know me enough. At least Poketale, Fragile Hearts, and the visual novels are playable. They have something there. You can play and enjoy them if you're brain dead. Slender Tale is a void that was sucking all the life energy out of me. As you can imagine, Slender Tale is Undertale, but it doesn't really work though, because the sprites were never meant to be scary, so trying to make them scary is pretty pointless. Gaster Slenderman is too slow, it doesn't really get faster the more pages you get, and even though I'm easily scared, not even the obvious jump scare you get when you get caught could spook me. I piss my pants when I hear loud noises. Not managing to scare me with a fucking jump scare shows that this game has no fucking clue what it is doing. It is slow, it's boring, it's the first game I experienced anti-fun. Of course, under all the games that tried to tell different stories with the Undertale framework, there are a lot of games that just take the Undertale characters or mechanics and put them in their own game, or take ideas from Undertale and just make it entirely their own. Heartbound is really interesting because while it's clearly inspired by Undertale, to call it a fan game would be a big stretch. Sure, you have a young child as a lead with enemies that seem to not be human. The main character has two different personalities, and one of the main imageries of the game is a heart with two colors, so there's a lot of inspiration here. The fighting system is still turn-based with real-time battles, but you only have the option to fight, at least in the demo. It's a bit stretched out in the longer boss fight towards the end of the demo, but I think it's a great solution to the slow, boring, and brain-dead fighting systems like in Final Fantasy. Yes, I will keep calling turn-based fighting systems boring, because that's what they are. JRPG players be like, oh my god, this gameplay is fire! You're brain dead. Anyways, one of the main reasons I put this one here is because MadPat from The Game Theorist played this game on stream, titled the stream in such a way that it seems that it was another Undertale project, then linked the game in the description to spark a small controversy, which was actually beneficial to Heartbound because otherwise I would have never heard about the game. While the game still receives dev updates to this day, it has been 3 years since we have seen anything substantial, and while I think dev team can finish the game, I'm slowly starting to doubt this whole project. It would be a shame if soon we would find this game in the cancel category, because I really liked everything I saw so far, which leads us to... I like Everhood a lot. Like Heartbound, calling this game an Undertale fan game is a bit stretch, but denying that there is an inspiration from Undertale would be a lie, especially since Dr. W.D. Gaster is literally in the game. But besides the inspiration, it's pretty much its own thing. The fighting system is completely different, incorporating a pseudo-rhythm game. The art style is close to what I could call high pixel art style. The story does surround souls, but it's more in an ethereal way, and pretty quickly in the beginning there's some crazy imagery floating around. Also, you can immediately retry a fight once you lose, which is 100% better than Undertale, where sometimes fights were just so far away from the last checkpoint and to annoyed me to no end. And before we move on to the actual Undertale fan games, one last entry. This is one of the more unique fan projects I've seen. It doesn't lean on Undertale that much except for the fighting system. In Can You Escape Heartbreak, as well as other Zodiac stories, you have a point and click phase where you have to puzzle things together, and a fight phase where you play a bullet hell and also have to solve puzzles like guiding missiles towards a fan. Overall, these games are really well made, but for some reason the developer of the game just stopped making those. You can still play the Zodiac games, and I would highly recommend those, which is not something I would say about clicker games in general. Unlike other annoying, long-running, time-consuming, predatory, unethical, boring clicker games, Clickertail is pretty short. If you click a heart, the count increases and you buy characters. If every bought character, your screen is filled up with these sprites until you finally have all characters standing in the background. It's short, it's sweet, and while there's nothing special, it still managed to entertain me for quite a while. Our next entry is also short, but for completely different reasons. Underracer is Undertale, but a racing game, and it's okay, I guess. The story is similar with a few changes here and there. The races are pretty short, there are special items during a race like in Mario Kart or Blur, and the game breaks after you race Monster Kid. Also, the game is cancelled. It's an interesting experiment, but that's mostly it. I could imagine a racing game based on Undertale in which you have the option to race normally, or you could also just dust them by doing enough damage, and that would determine which route you would go on. There's some potential here, but given what we got is a bit buggy and cancelled, I would assume that making this kind of game is pretty difficult. Underracer wasn't the only game to take something that works and smash it together with Undertale though. Undercards is Undertale, but Magic the Gathering. And it's fine. I like it. You have Undertale themed cards. Every round you gain one more magic coin, which allows you to put down more powerful cards. You need to build your own deck, and there's an official ranking on the site. If you want more Undertale themed stuff in your life, this is the game for you. But other than smashing Undertale characters into an already fun game like Magic the Gathering, there isn't much here. I'm not gonna lie, it's fun, but after playing so many fan games and seeing so many different takes on Undertale, like I said, everything starts to blur together to the point where I don't even know what I'm playing anymore.
Oh, okay. I'm going back to my puzzles now. They're pretty bonerific if I do say so myself.
Oh god. So, the Papyrus Big Christmas Adventure is a so-called rage game. They were, and I think still are, a big thing with Let's Players. Mainly because you can get pretty angry pretty quickly, and that always makes for good content. Thankfully, it's pretty short, and if you know what you're doing, you can parkour through this maze in like 10 minutes or so. I like the game, but there's something off about it. Let me put it like this. Once I played through the game, it graded me on my time, and I thought I could do better, but as soon as I got to a certain part of the run, I just gave up. Not because it wasn't fun, but because I was wasting my time. Which is weird because technically all games are time wasters, but for some reason, this is the one game that somehow convinced me that the time I was wasting here meant nothing. It's a strange feeling I never had before and never had since.
Kill me!
I'm going to throw Undertale Judgment, Undertale Mugen, and Bonetail into one pot because those follow a pretty similar blueprint. Judgment and Bonetail turn the bad ending fight into a 2D fighter with abilities on cooldown. While Judgment has only Sands and Frisks fighting on one stage, Bonetail has a variety of difficulties, skins, and stages. Like many of these fan games, they seem more like tech demos where the entertainment part of the game hasn't really been figured out yet. The hitboxes seem weird, the abilities seem either too weak or too strong. In Bonetail specifically, your energy runs out pretty quickly, and the higher difficulties are more like difficulty cliffs rather than difficulty curves. Also, to unlock different stages and characters, you will have to grind the same fight over and over and over again, sucking the small amount of entertainment that I needed to dig out of this one. Undertale Mugen is, I think, the most entertaining out of these three projects. It's janky, it's glitchy, most of the game is mean, and characters are widely different in power, but it's fun, I guess. I think the weirdness of it all makes the game shine. Compared to the other games, it doesn't try to recreate something that was already pretty good, but as a fighting game. It just does its own thing, and it seems to be the running theme with these fan projects that I like. As long as you try to make your own thing and not recreate what already worked, I tend to enjoy it more. And just to reinforce this point, let's talk about Ricky G, the developer of Undertale, went on to make a Don't Forget, which is an online Undertale game where I don't know what to do. You can fight and either dust monsters or spare them, and that's it. There's no story or plot to follow, there are no minigames as far as I could find out. It seems more like a chat room with Undertale characters. It's not bad, but I have no idea what I'm actually supposed to do. Still, I spent quite a bit of time just talking to people. For being a chat room though, the character limitation for message is a bit low, but that's mostly it. It's something you need to try it for yourself, because even if I tried to, I wouldn't be able to describe to you how it feels.
The stakes are high now. Look how high they are.
With the success of Undertale, it was only a question of time until someone tried to make this 2D RPG into a 3D RPG, and almost all the examples I could find make the same exact mistake. Undertale's layout and rooms are nonsensical, right? Recreating those rooms pixel by pixel looks odd in 3D. What if Undertale was 3D, Undertale 3D by Suplex Games, and Undertale 3D by Red X recreated everything as the original as possible, and it just doesn't look right. Undertale EX, on the other hand, is the one project I hope to see finished someday. There are 2 full-fledged fights, one with Undyne and one with Muffet, and even in an unfinished state, they're already pretty fun. Undyne's fight captures all the attacks from the main game perfectly, and even added its own twist sometimes, with the arena moving around while you're being attacked by spears. Muffet's fight is really interesting since it even has a second phase with a conveyor belt forcing you to move into the counter direction to survive like in the original game. The environments of those fights are also really well done and are more of an interpretation of what things would look like, since the original game has literally a black void as the background. Undertale X also has some older prototypes that show the waterfall, the hotel, and Tammy's cave, and while those are pretty close to the original game, they are stylized in such a way that it works in 3D, unlike the other projects. The project hasn't seen updates for a year, so I wouldn't put my hopes up, but out of all the Undertale in 3D projects, EX seems to be the one with the most amount of potential.
It's a beautiful day outside. Birds are singing, flowers are blooming. On days like this, kids like you should be burning in hell.
In the vast sea of Undertale Fangames, there are a lot of games that consist of mostly one fight. For example, in Undertale Disbelief, you fight a papyrus that can't believe you kill Sans, which makes him reincarnate said character, as well as Undyne. Yet, I think there seems to be very little effort to do anything else with the fights other than making it harder or adding quote-unquote new mechanics. Be honest with yourself. How many of these fights can you play until you see everything? Undertale was never really a fight-heavy game to the point that you can just avoid most fights. So while I understand that people really enjoy this fight and want more of it, I think it goes a little bit counter to what the game tries to teach. Nevertheless, everyone should enjoy whatever they want to enjoy. I just wish the developers would focus on making a full-fledged games instead of the same fight with virtually a different coat of paint, but at least those fights, most of them, are finished in development. On the list where I gathered all the interesting looking projects, there are 2 categories that tower over the other ones. The Just Ideas and the Cancelled Games category. There are too many to mention here, but the most noticeable ones are the Mnemonic, which has this really neat watercolored art style. As far as I know, it's still being worked on, but besides the trailer and a few screenshots, there isn't much to see. Undertale The Other Ground stands out through its pixel art style akin to the original game, but with more detail, and Angel's Lullaby also stands out through its pixel art style. Well, you see, when there's no demo, at least a little bit of gameplay that shows more than the walking cycle, the only thing that the customer or player can judge is the art style. Most of those games have great art style, but as long as there's no project to judge, these are just ideas. Now, most of those projects probably have a team working on it right now, but given that the cancelled category is as big as the Just Ideas category, I would say most of those games will never see the light of day, even the ones with the great looking screenshots. We already mentioned a few cancelled games in this video, like Undertale 3D, Poketale, Underfell by Primos, Sea Autotale, and Atonement, but there are many more. Overtale, cancelled. One Life, cancelled. Super Undertale Bros, cancelled. Underswap, cancelled. Semitale, cancelled. Wildbones, cancelled. Undertale Zero, cancelled. Helptale, cancelled. Evertale, cancelled. Aerial Myth, cancelled, and cancelled. So many cancelled games. And these are only the ones I could find. The cancelled games category is probably the biggest category of Undertale Fangames, and there's probably a good reason for that. I had the pleasure to interview Sword, the director and writer of Undertale Yellow, and they had this to say.
It's fun and rather easy to dive into a fresh project. You get all these neat ideas of story, gameplay, set pieces, and lots of motivation. Plus, it's only a 2D RPG, so it should be doable with a little help. Then you begin and dig deeper. You realize how much text will need to be written, how many sprites you'll need, music tracks. It's Undertale, so it'll also need branching paths which can be started or stopped at any time, so the world needs to react to all those choices you make. On top of that, someone's gotta do arguably the hardest job, programming. Put it all together and test it over and over until it's as bug-free as possible.
Another big reason might be because people get bored. What you liked 5 years ago is not the same thing that you like today. If you have been working on a project for a while with no monetary incentive or motivation, the easiest thing to do is just to drop it. And so you end with all these neat ideas with sometimes impressive concept art, maybe a half-finished demo, and that's it. Mostly. Because sometimes a project might get cancelled because of controversies.
You pick up your palette knife and then work that into your meat. Give your meat a good old rub. That's it. Nice and hot. Hot and spicy meat. Yeah, boy.
In 2017, in a convention somewhere in Asia, an artist received a cookie with a needle baked into it. After attempting to eat the cookie, they were hurt, but nothing major happened. There is evidence of the bloody cookie with the needle, the medical examination, and the police report. In the original post, they say that it is near impossible to catch the perpetrator because many people were giving them cookies as well as trying to stuff food into their pockets and mouths at that day. This is all the factual information we know. Virtually nothing more or less. Nevertheless, people jumped on this story because the artist was known to draw forbidden sands and frisk art. And so this incident was quickly accredited to the Undertale fanbase. The problem is, there is literally zero evidence for that. The needle incident, with a degree of doubt, did happen, but it's not a single hint that it was done by an Undertale fan. I'm not denying that there's a toxic Undertale fan base, but it seems that often stories get twisted quickly into something that either didn't happen or there's no evidence for it. The needling the cookie incident might be the most well-known case of toxicity that gets accredited to the Undertale fan base, but if you start to dig a little bit, you will find cases where there was probably some toxicity involved. I already mentioned Underswap, which basically switch a lot of characters' roles around while keeping their core personalities and changing some of their motivations. For example, Papyrus becomes the laid-back brother and Sans the chipper brother who wants to join the guard. Sans still liked puns and Papyrus still loved humans. So it should be pretty clear what is going on here, right? The original posts about Underswap and the game that was essentially finished cannot be found easily on the internet, and the reason for its cancellation is not very clear. From what I could gather, a lot of people believe that Popcorn Prince, the original creator of the EU, didn't like how people twisted Underswap Sans, later known as Blueberry Sans, into a child, instead of just Sans that still likes puns but wants to join the guard. After enough twisting by the fanbase, Popcorn decided to delete everything and leave the rest to the community. Some, on the other hand, are convinced that harassment was the reason why Popcorn left, other thinks that Popcorn just got bored and moved on, and there's also the possibility that it's all of the above. Unfortunately, the original posts are not well documented and neither are any of the comments from viewers towards Popcorn. Every time I tried to find out if harassment was the reason why Popcorn left, I stood in front of a blank wall because despite a lot of people claiming Popcorn was harassed, there's virtually no evidence of that. Trying to explain Popcorn's exodus on the basis that the fandom twisted one of the characters which Popcorn didn't like is also weird, since Popcorn is essentially twisting the original Sans as well. As a fan artist, you should be aware that the fandom is going to twist your creation as well. The most likely explanation is that Popcorn got bored of the project or was embarrassed by it and just moved on from the project while also deleting everything they had posted at that point. Still, the narrative prevails that the toxic fanbase drove Popcorn away, even though there's very little to no evidence for that. With all that said, it's not like there isn't a loud toxic minority in the Undertale community, especially on Tumblr. We can see that with Flowerfell, kinda. It's still unclear. From one post that is still available on the web archive, it is clear that a lot of theft happened with Flowerfell and Undergrowth, which understandably would make any artist angry. Yet again, there are some things that are strange here. The writer of the AU demands that nothing else other than fan art be made of the story, and while I understand the request, it's kinda hypocritical to demand exclusivity of something that is already a derivative of something else. In another blog post on DeviantArt by a completely different user, it's confirmed that the original artist dropped the story because they didn't like how people were shipping the characters and that the story was being stolen or being reposted. Again, I do understand the original artist's request, and I do think that not following the requests is a bit toxic. Still, as a fan artist, not being able to handle people twisting your creation is kind of hypocritical since you're basically doing the same with the original art. In this case, you're not even twisting the original Undertale story, you're twisting the AU Undertale that was made by someone else entirely. I highlighted these 3 stories because I think it's important to sometimes dive deeper and find out what is most likely true. The Needle Lady Cookie story is to this day accredited to the Undertale fandom. It's repeated in the most watched video about Undertale from Super Eyepatch Wolf, in People Ruin Undertale by Elvis the Alien, and in RPG Mongo's fandom files as well. Most people in and outside of the fandom think that Underswap, Underfell and Flowerfell got cancelled because of harassment, even though there's very little to no evidence towards that. In the Flowerfell incident, there's at least confirmed harassment by the creator, even though to what extent I can't confirm, and while the creator's wishes was disregarded by a portion of the Undertale audience, it does also seem like in that story the creator wasn't able to handle the spotlight and cope with the fact that sooner or later people would take their creations and twist it like they had done with the Underfell story and by extension the Undertale story. My whole point here is that there's often the Undertale community, in big quotation marks, is often portrayed as this giant, toxic, homogeneous blob of evil, and when you look into the stories where apparently the Undertale community was being toxic, it turns out to be either false, the story not having enough evidence to prove anything, or the story being more nuanced than the fans harassed the creator. Don't get me wrong, there is with 100% certainty a toxic part of the community, but it seems like often stories get blown out of proportion just because it's Undertale.
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad?
The Undertale fandom is a very interesting one. It was overrepresented in the past, even though it is relatively small in the wider gaming sphere. To this day, there is fan art, fan music, fan comics, and of course fan games being made. It shows how well the original product is, how well written the original characters are, and how much people connect with them. Unfortunately, I could only show a small section of the vast sea of Undertale fan projects. While most of those projects will fizzle out and die, I'm still thankful that I could experience so many of them. Hopefully, some of you will find enjoyment in diving into this real world of fan projects, and if you're still watching, I'm sorry I didn't make any Undertale inside jokes, because 1, I don't have the talent for jokes, and 2, everyone heard the determination meme 1,000 times. And yes, it took a lot of determination
He said it!
to finish this video, but I'm not that involved in the fandom. I like the game, I like some of the AUs, I like the music, and that's it. If you expect more Undertale stuff, I'm going to probably disappoint you. But there's a lot of Undertale content out there, and if you're interested, you can just search it out for yourself. Anyways, thanks for watching. Give me money on Patreon, otherwise I will stab you to death. Take care of yourselves, and have a nice day.